we're happy to start the afternoon session. And our first speaker is Bai Lu. He's today the head of the medical school in Tsinghua, and in a very special position where he transitioned twice, once from academia to industry and back. Therefore, hopefully he can tell us the story of how this is done. Professor Lu started in Shanghai for his first degree, right?
Yes.
And
yes.
then went for his PhD to the States, continued for postdoc, and then got an academic position in Columbia University, continued to the NIH, and then came back to China to the industrial section, and today the head of the medical school in Tsinghua. Please, Professor Lu, thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to begin by quoting one of my former boss who heads a big corporation, and he said, when you get older and older, you become, knowing less and less and less until you become an expert of absolutely nothing. So that's where I am. So I am an expert of almost nothing, and therefore we start talking about the models. And so to me, I think what's important is not just about innovation in technology, but innovation in business model. And we started this conversation yesterday about what the Xin should be doing differently, or what we should be expecting of Xin. And so I want to perhaps address the two things that I raised yesterday, which is which are what makes Xin unique, why Israel and China, and why Tel Aviv and Tsinghua, and also what should we be doing differently in terms of the way of doing things. All right. I think the chair has already introduced most of my beginning slides, so I won't bore you with my journey, which is a journey. I mean, Professor Yang said about the journey, education is a journey, and it's quite a long journey for my life. That is, I start out as an academic scientist, first at the Roche Institute, Molecular Biology, and then went to NIH, and then I took a dive to an industry. It was a GlaxoSmithKline. I had the biology division, R&D, and then a couple of years later, I returned to academia and had the med school. So the question is why I took the kind of journey and what the journey taught me in the last maybe 10 decades here. So this thing basically is the motivation behind the all of that. I took a neuroscience because I'm a neuroscience and neurobiologist myself, and so I take a neuroscience as an example, but other field is essentially the same. That is, you see, this plots the papers that were published in the last decades. And you see our knowledge, there's an explosion of neuroscience knowledge. I mean, we know more and more. There's papers after papers after papers. But look at the drugs that it's been approved for nervous system disease. It's on the decline. So there's a huge gap in translating our knowledge into medicines. So that was one of the motivations that drive me to the industry. And let me just take a minute just to highlight, because I think most of you are in academia. And making drugs and making medicines is a huge undertaking that, in general, if you cannot remember anything, it's more than $1 billion, more than 10 years to make one drug. And the process is something like this. You don't need to remember. That is starting from a target to a molecule and then to clinic, and with lots and lots and lots of money. But I want to say a few words about attrition. It's basically failures. So making medicine is just full of failures. So there are three levels of failures. One is called a target attrition. That is, you think a drug is good in science. You think the target is good, the drug target is good, but in the end, the target cannot find a compound that hit the target. So that's called a target attrition. That costs fewer dollars, maybe in the matter of a few $1 million. And then there's a molecular attrition. That is, you find a great target, but you screen and you screen and screen, and finally you find nothing. And that's called a molecular attrition, and that takes a huge amount of money. And then at the end, the most costly is a clinical attrition, that you find a beautiful molecule that hits the target so well, and it's got beautiful animal work and cell culture work, and you went to human, it doesn't work. It doesn't work because it's a safety. The people take it, they have a side effect, or they they are feeling pain, or there's no effect, largely. So that's called a clinical iteration that costs, I mean, half of the money, at least half $1 billion is used in here. So then the question is why? The industry has been increasingly under scrutiny and being criticized by the society. Why you guys cannot come? You spend so much money. Why can't you come up with medicine for us? And now as the society advances, we need more and more medicines for us. And why you cannot come up with that? And a lot of people have different opinions. I highlighted a few. I mean, the first few are biology and drug targets. It's difficult to come by. And animal models, you think the work that you've done in animal would help you understand human. That's not the case. A lot of times it's not. And for neuroscience, one of the biggest challenge is the molecules that you make cannot get into brain. There's something called a blood-brain barrier, or BBB, that prevents molecules from entering into the brain. And therefore, no matter how beautiful your molecule is, you cannot get in the brain. You cannot get in the brain. And there are a few other things that I won't get into, but the thing that I highlighted here is something that I want to draw your attention, which is big farmers. Big farmers become bigger and bigger and bigger, and they're increasingly risk averse, and they're unwilling to, and they're like a big gigantic tank that they cannot move around easily, and so they're not nimble. They're anti-innovations. That's part of reasons. I'm not the whole reason. The part of reason that I finally think industry is not for me, and maybe for others, but industry, big farmer is not for me. So that's there's a problem that's already raised, and I think I want to get into how we're going to solve this problem. So initially, I thought translation, right? So you have academic science, which does a lot of work on drug targets, animal models, and so forth, and you have drug industry that come up with targets and molecule candidate, drug candidate, and clinical studies. You need translations. Translation to me means you find the targets, you understand the disease mechanisms, and you develop technologies and models, and you come up with biomarkers that track the drug effects. Well, it's not that simple. I mean, if that's simple, then people should have solved this already, right? So I started looking into why I was a VP of biology. I looked around throughout the country and looked for what could be learned from institutions that did well. And one institute came to mind. It was Johns Hopkins BSI, the Brain Science Institute, headed by Jack Gribbs, who unfortunately died of brain tumor. But he pioneered or initiated this. He got a $100 million donation from anonymous source, and instead of distributing the money to the scientists and high graduate students and buy equipment, he said, no, this money is going to be used to promote translation of academic discovery into the industry. So what he did was he did quite a few interesting things. So first he hired a part-time IP lawyer who worked in the industry before, so he knows what to patent and what not to patent. And then he hired a tech transfer person and a BD person, business development. For most of the scientists don't know what the BD means. BD basically means taking things from academia and swallow into the industry. But this is called a reverse BD. That is, they hired a BD person from industry and then try to package the discovery in the academia and then try to distribute into the industry. So he hired that, and most importantly, he hired a person who's a lead discovery scientist, whose name is Barbara Fletcher, who from Pfizer, and she organized a team of about 20-some people to fill the gaps that the academic discovery, there's something lacking, which most scientists don't know about it. Something very simple, like a dose-response curve. I mean, to scientists, oh, this is boring, but it's so important for industry to actually see there's a dose response in order to find something really useful. So anyhow, this is one successful, not so successful, but it's a successful attempt, I would say, at the Hopkins. That's a good thing. The other thing that I looked around was disease foundation people. Those are rich people who have their children or relatives who are suffered with a certain disease. So they don't care about how beautiful papers you publish. And what they care about is to come up with medicine for their own children, right? And they cannot wait. So they're strongly motivated, and they're very quickly to identify gaps between academic and industry, and they're filling the gaps. And one particular example, which I'm not going to go into item by item, is this famous person, Michael J. Fox, who had Parkinson's himself. So he said, I cannot wait. In my lifetime, I had to fix this, right? So he funds a lot of research that will fill the gaps. If there's no biomarkers, I'll develop biomarkers. If there's no new targets, I'll develop targets. If there's no animal models, I'll do that. I'll put money to the best people to do these things that's not been done before. So that's the another model that when I was in industry, I look around, those are the things. Now I'm at Tsinghua. So I've looked at Tsinghua and perhaps universities around the world, and I see what are the problems that prevent university from. I mean, this trip is very good, and I've read the book of a Startup Nation, and I think it's an opportunity for me to learn how Israelis are doing this. But throughout the world, I've been visited lots and lots of academic institutions, and there are a lot of problems with translating discoveries into the marketplace. IP protection is one. Not able to do effective tech transfer is another, and business models. So a lot of scientists don't know and don't care about a business model. They don't have an idea about timelines and exit strategies and so forth. And there's generally lack of funding, and this is particularly true in China, that lack of venture capital monies. I mean, there's actually data that indicate that we're short of venture capital money that helps entrepreneurship. And also, scientists want to look at the project as their babies. There's an interesting joke I heard from the IP person. Scientists look at the project as their baby. And he said, you should not treat the project as your baby. You should treat it as a pig. The pig, you grow it, you sell it. You kill it, you sell it. Babies, you never kill your babies, right? So you keep putting money until the company go bankrupt. So that's the idea you should treat your project as a pig. Until someone can buy it. Anyway, so this is a development chain, if you will. So you start out with a concept, with a technology, and prototype and product. I mean, mostly a company started from that way. And then here's a role of scientists. And those who are accountable, right? The doctors and biologists who come up with a concept and a technology. Physicians help develop for the case of a medical device. They help with the technology, and they help test the prototype until you come up with something that is in the clinic. The difference between the other industry versus the medical field is that there's something sitting in between, which is, you could call it hurdles, but it's also safeguard for human beings, which is the regulatory offices. So FDA in the United States, in China it's called the CFDA. And there's a regulatory, in the industry there's a word called hurdles. The regulatory is a hurdle. And so how do you deal with that? And there's a lot of investment that you need at the very stage. And the later you go, the more money it takes, right? So I'm going to try to see if, in the short couple months that I've been at Tsinghua, we've thought of a few models that could help pushing the things towards the marketplace. So one idea was actually not my idea. When I first joined, after a couple months, a head of R&D of a big corporate came to me and say that how about we do a company together? It's a big company, and they want to do together with Tsinghua. So we discussed and came up with this model. That is, a big corporate, a global company, will form a Chinese company in China with their technology and with their investment as well. But they're not going to be the key player. It's going to be a Chinese company because the majority of the fund comes from, 51% of shares come from the Chinese source. So now with Tsinghua, we form a platform or incubator or whatever you want to call it, in which Tsinghua will provide funds and students, and we will add values to whatever the original ideas. And then through research and development, we get into the clinical stage and regulatory stage and manufacture and sales. Now, the key point of this slide is that there are certain things that the university professors are good at, there are certain things that industry are good at, and we have to be complementary with each other. And the things that universities are good at is innovation, technology development. Things that universities are not good at is clinical trial studies, and there's a lot of complicated things with doctors, and especially regulatory, and also manufacturing sales. So if the industry can take care of these, while the university science are doing that, then that'll be a great combination and complement. So this is something that we've been discussed and for quite a few months, and now we come to a stage where we're going to try it. So in the next couple of weeks, we will see how we can form a company together and then do it together. So this is the one model, and I call it the innovation could come from, this is Tsinghua, right? Tsinghua MedTech Institute. So the idea and the IP and the funds come from a big company, and hopefully when we do something, we add value, and then something is going to come out to the big company, and the handover to the big company. And this is the conventional role where the Tsinghua scientist will make a discovery, and through this incubator, and then exit. And then the third idea is that the innovation could come from elsewhere. Could come from Israel, for example, and then come to Tsinghua because Tsinghua has certain expertise and Tsinghua has the capability to add values. And then so after some times of research and development, and then exit. For exit, we also have multiple exit routes. We could exit just simply to work with a CRO to go into the marketplace. We could serve as a technology service platform. We could go out licensing to a big companies, or ideally you want to do these three, which is a co-development. You take a part of the equity and let it go towards the market step by step until the end in the marketplace you own certain equity. So that's a much better return to the universities. Also, you spin off companies, and when you get to a certain stage, the company can be spun off. That you generate a much bigger values, or you can hand over to the big company, and then big company give you a milestone payments and then loyalties, and at the end the share equity as well. So this is the another thing that I want to talk about in terms of business model. Now finally I come to Israel. Why Israel, right? And before we get into why Israel, I want to address a question that I asked quite a lot of leaders in multinational corporate leaders. I say, why China? I say, why all the big IBMs, Microsoft, GlaxoSmithKline, Roche, they all come to China. Why? And so, before I asked the question, I have something in mind, which is this book. If you want to understand China, maybe you want to read this book by Nasbit, who spent 8 years in China, and then wrote this book called China's Megatrain. It tells more than what the most Chinese people know about China from the Western's perspective. And of course, we all talk about this book, right? Why China? And initially, they say, oh, it's cheap labor. The China labor is cheap compared to the Western world. Well, it's not necessarily true. I mean, most leaders would not say it's because of this, because the labor price is getting higher and higher now. Huge market, of course. It's a huge, huge, huge market, which I will get back to. Science is on the rise in China, and there's a spirit here as well, doing something different. The companies want to do something that are difficult to do within their corporate structure. So they want to do it in China as an experiment, as a geographic separation. And someone said, our own CEO, actually, GlaxoSmithKline CEO says, rise with the awakening dragon. He said a dragon. The dragons are awakening. So you better take a ride with the dragon because it flies, right? And then most importantly, most people quote this as a culture and spiritual changes. That is, there's pretty much like Israel, that Chinese people, at least in this period of life, there's a can-do attitude, there's a passion, and also working very, very hard, entrepreneurship at some parts of China, especially in southern part, and also the champion of innovation. I want to quote another book, which is That Used to Be Us by Thomas Friedman. who wrote The World is Flat. And in that book, he visited China and came up with 5 things that the United States used to do and China is not doing, I think Israel is doing, which the government investment of education, infrastructure, railways, and so forth, highways, immigration. So the United States benefited from a huge influx of Jewish people first, Indian and Chinese, and China is taking a lot of overseas returnees. Myself is an example. I was trained in the United States and returned to China, and government investment of R&D, and this is government regulation of the financial market. So that's what he thinks the 5 pillars for a sustainable economy, and that's what United States used to be doing, and what China is now doing. And so now this is very fresh. Yesterday, so I was fortunate to get a chance to get a chance to see him and have autograph of this book, and which I was inspired very much. And yesterday I raised these 2 questions. So why Tel Aviv and Tsinghua? And the other is what models should we adopt? What models should we adopt in terms of the collaboration in the Xin model? All right, so this is what I think. I don't know if Professor Zhang would agree with me. I mean, I've just put it on the table for discussion. It's not, so this is like, you can see this. I did it in Hazen last night when everybody's sleeping. I was doing it. So it has to be something big on societal, something impactful in the society. It has to be scientifically and technologically disruptive. You know, something that you cannot do otherwise. It's going to have a huge impact in our way of doing science. Cross-discipline, that we've talked about this, over and over, interdiscipline, cross-discipline. When people who are very different meet together, something great is going to happen. So that's the spirit, and it has to be something unconventional. And so when I was a student, one of my mentors said, if your best competitor can think of this idea, throw it in the trash. You should not be doing it. So unconventional is the key. And Tel Aviv University and Tsinghua University, you got to find something complementary, something that Tel Aviv is good, that Tsinghua is weak. And then something that Tsinghua is good and Tel Aviv is. So complementary will be an area that we could probably be focusing on. And the other thing is it cannot be done by industry. So if industry was a huge influx of fund and a lot of people, if they can do it, we shouldn't be doing it. So that's the things that I can think of, and I put a ... So, I hope at the end you all can discuss. So here I highlighted something. So you said complementary. So Israeli people, you're looking for something that you could do in China. So one thing I already mentioned is that there's a lot of innovation in Israel. The market is small. There's a huge market in China. There's not enough innovation. So this is already quite a good combination already. But other than that, there are 4 things I can put down here. One is a CRO. So this is something that if you haven't heard about that, you should, which is China. This is not a plan. The Contract Research Organization. It's a huge industry that most big farmers are now, big companies are coming to China to look for. That is, they're professionals who are doing experiment for you. So, and it's cheaper, faster, more reliable, and also now secure. So CRO is one thing that if you have a good idea with some conventional technology can solve, just go to CRO instead of doing experiment yourself. Most of big companies set up R&D in here. And they've made a lot of money in China. There's a secret they didn't want to tell you, which is the money they made has to be spent in China. And they're looking for things to do. So they have expertise, they have funds. So this is one thing that if you do something great, then you can have the big corporate. Because I was on the other side. I was looking for things to invest. There's nothing to invest. So big companies, R&D is one thing to think about. Government support. So there's a 30 billion RMB spent in the drug discovery industry alone for the major grand challenge project or whatever. So the government is supporting R&D, and there's something that to think about. And again, a market. So once you think about was that 1.3 or 1.4 billion people? If you have a product, it's a penny, and 1.4 billion people, think about it, how much money you can make. So maybe in the last minute or so, I want to mention one field. It's not my field, but it's a field that I think is for something to think about it, which is a liver disease. There's a liver fibrosis, and what is it called? The HBV, HCV, the hepatitis virus. Large number of Chinese people are infected. So these are the numbers. So chronic HBV patients, 30 million people. HBV carriers, 120 million people carry this virus. And this virus could very later on lead to liver fibrosis and the liver cancer. So liver cancer is a huge problem. It's a disease that's currently not curable. It leads to a lot of deaths. The 5-year survival rate is under 11%. This is a huge area. We need a diagnosis. We need a treatment. Treatment doesn't have to be drug. It could be medical device. I will mention one idea that medical device could possibly be used. And so here I highlight a few things that Tsinghua has or is going on. One is what we call 3D 3D tissue screening system, which is developed by a professor in the biomedical engineering department, Professor Du. It's actually a very clever way that they with 386 wells, they code the special materials in which you put one cell in there, it grows to a tiny liver in there, and you put another glass of printed with drugs, and you can put all these together, you can do dose response to look at a real tissue rather than liver cells. So that's innovation that could be used for drug screening. Yesterday you heard about from Professor Sun about the 3D printing. You can print a liver, if you will, with the liver cells. That will be more analogous to real liver. If you think about iPS cells, the stem cell field, where you can take cells from individuals with liver disease, you can convert them into iPS cells, and then you can grow them a lot, and you can print a liver through a differentiation. So those are the technologies that could be possibly used. And also, there are a few other things that's going on in terms of preclinic. There's a xenograph, that is, you take animals and you transplant liver cancer cells from human, and there's many different kinds, and you can create a different kind of animal models that will test actually in human cells. And there's of course, huge populations in China that could be tested in the clinic, and there's a lot of regulatory know-hows, and we're developing clinical development capabilities. All in all, it's a area. Oh, there's a okay, so that's fine. So this is the area that I champion for potential. If you at least making some progress in this field, it's going to have a huge impact for Chinese people. The societal impact, and also it's going to have a huge profit as well because the market is so big. So that's an area that we're looking for collaboration, at least from the medical school perspective. Novel antibodies, novel drug treatment agents, early diagnosis, and so forth. And so I put this as one of the challenges. Not that grand, or grand if you can really solve it, but put it into perspective. I think we have to think about a business model. We have to think about how we can do things differently. And I would like to hear, with the ... I would like to hear everyone's comments on how we can do it in Xin model. Thank you.
Thank you, Lou. So, questions, comments about how we transfer things from academia to industry? And back? Okay. Yeah,
Oh, sure. Okay.
I got you. In this case, thank you very much.